Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, this is our last panel for today, day one of the Maine Broadband Summit, third annual-ish summit. So with this, we're going to get a little bit into financing. The last time we met in person, 2 years ago, there was still so much planning, and there is still so much planning happening across Maine, but there are so many more communities that have really progressed to, we've planned, we know what we want to do, but how do we fund it? And so we're going to welcome Nick Batista from both the Allen Institute, but also the chairman of the ConnectMaine Authority board, to lead us around a conversation with several others on financing. And this is just a quick reminder for those that are going to be on this panel, and thank you to those on the last one who did so well on this, to slow down, explain your acronyms, so that those in the audience can understand what you're talking about, and that's not a barrier to the information. We have just a variety of partners and community members and leaders from Maine that have varying degrees of knowledge when it comes to broadband and what we're talking about. And so especially as we dig into something like financing, I'm sure there's a whole nother set of language to understand. So I just wanted to throw that reminder up there, and I thank those in the chat that have been helpful around some of the language that we're talking about. So with that, I'm going to spotlight Nick Batista and let him kick off his discussion.
All right, welcome. Thank you, everybody. Excited to be part of this discussion. Before we dive into it, I just wanted to make one quick comment to link some of the threads in the last panel with some of the direction that we're going. That question towards the end about is infrastructure more important than affordability or the ability to use the infrastructure? I think we're on the cusp of experimenting with some pretty interesting ways of rethinking about that problem and that divide. You heard Peggy mention the Connect Kids Now project that ConnectMaine did, where last fall, where students who didn't have an internet connection were built out directly by internet service providers in a very rapid fashion. And so there you had infrastructure being built to solve a broadband use and adoption problem. And I think that's a pretty interesting model as we start thinking about telehealth or solving some of these other needs. If it's important enough to solve, you can build right to the people who need the infrastructure. So that was just a little aside here. Diving into this panel. So this is the panel where we tell you how to find the sacks of cash and money to make your project go, or we help you start thinking about how to get there. There's significant public funding coming in for broadband projects, more so now than ever. You've heard it a couple of times in the threads of the conversation today. The federal money and the restrictions on these are going to be informing all of the broadband infrastructure projects and discussions going forward in the state, or many of the discussions going forward in the state in the next few years. We know that the money that's available from the federal government won't be able to fully cover the need statewide. You'll hear that theme again and again, both from this panel and also from others. If it's a $1.2 or $1.4 billion project statewide to make sure everybody has that 100 connection, you should be thinking about how you're contributing to that total, that bigger total. A couple $100 million from the state, there needs to be a whole bunch of other money coming in from other places. Fortunately, broadband projects generate revenue, and this revenue can support borrowing or allow investors to generate a return on their equity investment. And that helps close the gap between the project cost and the amount of public money that's coming into the state. There are various risk mitigation tools that can help build your capital stack and ensure these projects get built. The revenue from these projects needs to go somewhere, and ultimately whoever owns the infrastructure owns a potential revenue producing asset that likely has some additional value. Statewide, there aren't that many, if any, projects that are going to get 100% grant funding. As we move through this conversation, it's worth thinking about financing in a couple of different buckets, how things have been, how they are currently, and where they're going in the near future. This is a rapidly developing area. So our panelists will help you make sure that you're ready to take full advantage of this once in a generation opportunity, and that you can start working or continue working on a plan for funding your project. We'll hear from a little bit more from our panelists, who they are, why they're here, what perspective they're bringing, and then engage in some question and answers. So we've got one more panelist to come up. Here we go. Thank you. Okay, just want to do some quick introductions. Maybe start with Carlos B.
Yes, the first of the two Carloses, which is a little odd. Thanks, Nick, for this panel. I'm Carlos Barrionuevo. I have been both leading, if you saw on the slide, both leading a community broadband project in Georgetown over the last couple of years. And I'm now on the Maine Connectivity Authority as a board member, and I am the community representative. Danielle, who is in the last platform, of course, is the represents telehealth, and I represent community. My role really is to bring a lot of the learnings over the last couple of years in working both in our community and with our community members, as well as working with different funding sources, as well as working, frankly, with Nick and others, bring that to the board and bring that perspective to the board as we start to think about how we're going to rapidly utilize, we're going to use this money to rapidly build out across the entire state, not just in one community, but in all communities. Carlos, I think you're next, right?
Thanks. So I'm Carlos Mello. I have met many of you, and this is a great group of people to talk about this topic. So I enjoy it all the time. Just a little bit of an introduction on the Finance Authority of Maine, where I am the acting CEO. Is that the Finance Authority of Maine provides support in helping jobs grow in the state. We do it through helping individuals attain higher education, and that's something we're not going to talk about today, but we also do that by helping businesses succeed. And the way we've historically done that is we've helped Maine businesses through providing loan guarantees through our commercial loan insurance program, as well as direct loans to businesses. And over our 40 years, we've supported well over $2 billion in financings in the country, in the state, and supported over 100,000 jobs. So that's my my little pitch for the day. But let's talk about what we're talking about today, which is broadband. So we also support many of the ISPs that have been part of these calls, and have helped them through loan guarantee programs as they built out their own internal infrastructure, or help them do project financing as they built out or in the plans of building out networks across the state. That's been our focus to date. That's what we do today. With the advent of the grants that we're going to be talking about, another focus from the federal and state government, there's going to be the position to provide additional supports, as well as stack that along other pieces of what we're going to affectionately call the capital stack through this meeting. And we'll talk about how do you do that. If you want to think of an image or a metaphor for FAME, FAME tries to be the glue that holds those stacks together and connects the different components by de-risking some of the pieces. So with that, I'll push it over to Neil. Thanks, Neil.
Cool. Thank you, Carlos. So really happy to be here, and obviously thank you for having us. My name is Neil Katz. I'm with Arctaris Impact Investors. Arctaris Impact Investors, we're really a family of funds. All right, we provide debt products, so think junior, senior loans, leases like dark fiber leases, as well as equity with a particular focus on opportunity zones. You could say kind of that golden thread that really ties all of our funds and all of our investments together is impact and community benefit. I'd say without that, we're not investing. We recognized early on that there aren't a lot of great options to ISPs when seeking capital. So we formed Arctaris Broadband Company with the hopes of breaking that mold and providing capital that solves problems, not creates them. We typically partner with state and local authorities as well as foundations to attract risk mitigation tools to our investments, which help us to provide capital to ISPs at an appropriate cost. We definitely understand that, hey, you can't really deliver affordable broadband if you can't access affordable capital. So, beyond that, we like to be more than just a capital provider, right? We partner with the ISPs we work with. We try to understand the challenges they face and help them find solutions to those challenges. Whether it's strategic, whether it's impact, we help develop initiatives with them that can help make these networks more inclusive, generate a higher take-up, promote a more robust network, and obviously enhance brand value for all parties. So we're currently working on several developments, here in Maine, where we earn the support from the Finance Authority of Maine, because they really understand the impactful nature of this infrastructure. So they offered us certain tools on these investments where without them, we probably couldn't have pursued the investments. So we hope this is really just the beginning of our network deployment activities here in Maine. And I'm just really happy to be here discussing this topic with everyone today. So again, thank you.
Great. Thank you all. We're going to dive into this a little bit more. We're going to start at the relatively high level, and then we're going to get down to some specifics and try to help make sure that this is real for all of our audience, all of our participant, all of the community partners who are working hard on these projects. So we've got a handful of questions here. I'll ask them, and each of you can take a crack at responding as you see fit. There's a lot of money coming into this space. We know that. We know there's a lot of federal money. Can you help us understand the impact of these funds? How are they helping us close the digital divide? And how will mission-related investors and others be thinking about this money? And I think this really gets at taking out that crystal ball and what's going to be the impact of these federal funds on this sector.
So let me start, and I'll kick it off to my colleagues on the line. We know that the number, as Nick has said, is much bigger than what has been provided, even though the federal number is great, estimated at $250 million plus when you start adding other components like the state small business credit initiative and some of the allocations that have been made to municipalities under the America's Rescue Plan Act. So, but it's, only, it's 6 times greater. It's 1.2, 1.4, 1.5 billion is the cost to do it. So, as we talk about this, what we're trying to understand is how much can we finance based on the cash flow that comes off of these businesses? These, there's going to be revenue that's going to come from that. How much comes from that? How do we take these guarantees or these grants or whatever else we want to call them, these financial instruments that we've provided, and add that to that? And then how do we pull from the support of the municipalities to be able to then put a compelling argument together that if I have a $5 million project or a $20 million project, that someone is going to willing to invest $20 million in that project because so much of it is supported just from the natural cash flow from the transaction. So much is supported from the state saying we're standing behind it, or another guarantor like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the municipality saying that we're standing behind it, and individual investors standing behind it. And others have, both Neil and Carlos have played in both of those roles. So I'd love to hear from them, but that's just my introduction as to how you sort of pull the pieces together. They're the ones who do the hard work.
Yeah, do you want to go, Neil, or I'm happy to?
Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, no, I think a couple things to set the mood here. One is that I think we all understand this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. The amount of money that's coming in, while it is not enough, is an enormous base upon which to build this capital stack. So it provides a set of cash that we can build these other financing options upon. We have not had that in the past. I think everybody has been building, has been looking at projects, has not over the last couple of years, has never had that real start. And that's ConnectMaine has attempted to do that, but it has had a small fund. So this is an enormous start for the state. But the problem is not, again, is to try to leverage this to connect the whole state in this, let's call it 5-year or 10-year, whatever the period is, that the federal funds in some ways are setting that. So that's the first thing to think is this is a base of money which lets us build on top of it. And so we need to devise solutions and understand the characteristics of the different money that's coming in. One of the things is that there are opportunities for mission-related folks as well as revenue as well to come in as well. This allows us that base to do that. One thing I want to also make sure I want to get up front, and then I'm going to turn over to Neil, is it's really important throughout this conversation to remember that that affordable capital conversation, this idea that both it's an affordable project, affordable capital, the choices that you're going to make throughout your process, they will all drive the affordability of the actual subscription in your market or in your community. And so there's a number of choices that you're going to be looking at as you start building your capital stack that will impact ultimately what your community is going to be doing, which is why the community needs to be involved at the front. But again, I just want to sort of lay that this is a great opportunity because it allows us to sort of build these options and to leverage that money for the entire, to solve the entire problem up front. Neil, sorry.
Cool. Thank you, Carlos. So, and I'll be a little kind of silly here, so bear with me. But the way I think about this really public financing, right? This is really that silver bullet that takes down, this werewolf of a problem. All right, you still need a gun, all right? You still need someone to pull the trigger, and you still need to hit your target, right? So these funds are really just that critical tool to appropriately align, the risk and rewards across the development and everybody involved, and to take projects that were otherwise uneconomical and make them investable, right? It's not the all-in-one solution, but it can be that critical piece that helps deliver a solution to problems that existed before and otherwise previously couldn't be solved.
Okay, cool. Thank you, guys. We've got some questions popping up in the chat. Carlos, I sort of felt like you were edging towards ownership and in your conversations. Is that what you were, Carlos B? Is that one of the decision points you were getting towards?
I think that anybody who's done a business or a financial knows that sometimes you form the structure and the capital structure to achieve the business objectives. This is no different. I think my experience is if the community is focused, if the community will make certain decisions about whether or not they want to build in an area that may already have 80% coverage, they will make certain decisions about whether or not they want to set affordability from the start, how important that is. And that's going to help drive the decisions they make about how they finance the project. And so it keeps going back to Carlos M's point about the capital stack. There's going to be, what we're going to do is we're going to try to create these policies and opportunities that are a little more explicit in how to access different types of capital. Some of it will be the capital will come through the state. Some of it will be things that we create with FAME and the MCA and other things as we start to talk about that. And some will be private investment probably, and some will be the towns. And so how that money sort of plays with each other and the revenue that you generate, that will all play together and how that project gets financed. I think there's some messages in the chat. I'm not really looking at it, but starting to talk about, is it better to own a project? Are you going to fund dark fiber? Are you going to competitive projects? I think the MCA right now, certainly our thought is we're going to look at the entire state and the problems, and we're not favoring one over the other. But ownership is very important to the communities, and you have to make your own decisions on how best you want to solve the problem that is in front of your community. So ownership in a lot of cases will be a community may want to own, but also remember the trade-offs to ownership. And again, remember, what are you trying to do, and what does the project dynamics ultimately look like? Does that answer that question, or is that sort of?
I think that's getting there. I suspect this will be a theme that keeps coming up through the conversation. Can the three of you help orient us to some of the basic concepts involved in this discussion? Some of the things that we've talked a little bit about here. What is the capital stack? How about what is take rate and why is that important? And then maybe getting into we'll get into some of the specific tools and how they look. But what are sort of the categories of things we're talking about here?
Cool. I can jump in on this one real quick. So, when I think about capital stack, I'm really thinking about all of the capital required to execute on the project. All right. So this may not necessarily mean all of the equity that an owner or outside investor has to put into a project. This includes things like loans, all right, to support the project. So think about construction financing, revolvers or lines of credit. Think about more stable debt at that company level as well. Think about grants that can come in and contribute capital to the project. Even non-cash pieces contribute to a capital stack. Think about tax abatements. Think about guarantees, stuff to help secure the capital stack. All of these elements kind of come together, and they're critical to developing a capital stack that's going to be needed to take on these types of challenges in various markets throughout Maine and really the whole country. So when I think about capital stack, that's really all of the dollars that go into the project and really what types of tools you can use to secure those dollars as well.
Exactly. And the role that FAME and others have played is to trying to reduce the cost of that capital by providing guarantees or grants or some other type of subordinated debt or something that will absorb losses should the project not generate the revenue that it anticipates. So we've heard about take rates and the like, and often what that does is the take rate is ultimately going to generate the amount of money that comes off the program. So a program that can generate $200,000 a year supports something much different than something that generates $1 million a year. And so it's really about solving for X. And that's where the community gets involved. And we have a number of questions in the comments, or in the chat, I should say, about, is it private investment? Is it public investment? All of those things can be factored in. It's easier to add on to your home than it is to build a new home. So if you decide that you're going to own it directly, know that the cost is going to be dramatically more than if you're going to be trying to support the existing solution and fill in the gaps. That is a discussion and a debate that we're going to be having and for some time. That's a big part of what the Maine Connectivity Authority and others around the state, this group is going to help form that view as to where it is, but everything has a cost. And so we just need to be able to understand that. Carlos.
Yeah, we've talked on other previous summits. I mean, the two crucial inputs are you need to understand what your take rate's going to be, and you need to understand what your project cost is going to be. The size of the project will determine how much you need, and the size and your take rate, and what your take rate times your subscription rate, which again, that is also tied to what your affordability goals are in your community. That will determine how much you can reasonably borrow against that revenue stream, that cash flow stream. So as a community, you have to make a couple very crucial decisions. You have to decide what's my project cost going to be, which is tied directly to how many homes you're going to serve, whether or not it's going to be 100% coverage, whatever it might be. And you need to understand what your take rate is going to be based on that, what you think your community will do. And then you need to figure out how much you want to charge based on what the service will cost you. And that will depend on which operational model you choose. So those are the important inputs that you're going to have to make some decisions on, and they will guide you to some extent on what, what you're going to be able to do when you're accessing the capital markets. And the crucial piece that we know now, though, is that we will have, as part of that component, there will be federal money that will be coming in. There'll be some level of money that will come in that will support that project. And but you still need to understand what that total costs and how much you could borrow and what you're willing to do.
Can you quickly talk a little bit more about take rates? What are they, and how does that change some of these things? How would increasing your take rate change some of the financing options?
So when I think about take rate, I'm thinking about, hey, we're gonna build some form of network. It may be fiber, maybe wireless, maybe some mesh network, 5G, what have you. But ultimately, you're gonna have some type of coverage area. Okay, that's the whole market that your network can touch. That doesn't mean every single premise, house, business in that network is actually going to subscribe to your services. So the number of customers that subscribe to your services within that coverage area, that's really your take up or your take rate. So in some cases, you can target a 40% take rate, for instance, which means that roughly 40% of those households, businesses, customers will actually sign on to be customers of your network. So, the number of subscribers or customers you have, that's really your source of revenue into your project. So the higher the level of take rate, and obviously the larger the coverage area, relative to that take rate, the more revenue that you can attract to your project. And obviously, revenues, it's a critical piece here, okay? But you don't pay back an investment or a loan or a lease with revenue. You kind of hear us jumping between revenue, cash flows, free cash flows, and the like. So really, you have a team you need to pay. You have maintenance that needs to be performed. You have customer service that needs to be delivered. The key measure to most investors is really on that free cash flow piece. Now, obviously, you don't have free cash flows without revenue in most cases, but we just need to be honest about the payback periods on these investments and on these different types of networks, where something with a technology like fiber is going to be a little bit more expensive, or maybe a lot more expensive than some form of wireless technology. But it's also going to be the most robust, the most future-proof, and really the highest quality network that you can deliver. So at the end of the day, it's going to have hopefully a higher take rate, but we know for sure it's going to have a higher cost to deliver, and it's going to require more free cash flows to really pay that back over time. So what can you do in that type of instance, right? How do you enhance payback period, or the time from which those free cash flows can really pay back the investment into that network? Grants really are that ultimate tool, right? Someone putting money into a project and not wanting any money in return for that investment. All right, that's one way you can really increase the payback period to the investors that are requiring some form of payback on the investment. So, things like, revenue is important, but the project really needs to demonstrate some level of free cash flows to attract different types of capital to your development.
And how much does this change if it is owned by a publicly traded ISP, a small family mom and pop owned ISP, or a local community? Does some of the concepts we're discussing here change significantly, or is it really applicable to a lot of the discussion?
I'll say, for me personally, I'd say it's a significant difference. At the end of the day, you can have large public companies that are overly leveraged, okay, maybe generating insufficient cash flows. So in some cases, you can kind of come to a point where all else is equal. But in most cases, at the end of the day, to build out a network that's going to, pass 5,000 premises or 10,000 or 20,000 premises, it's going to require a certain amount of capital. And if you're a smaller, mom and pop, a local ISP, that size of investment relative to the size of your balance sheet is going to become somewhat out of balance to that investor, where really what out of balance means is that it creates more risk for the investor. And I use that term broadly, investor. This is lender, lessor, investor. It's going to increase the risk to them. So we kind of mentioned grants as a great tool to, reduce that payback period, but things like guarantees, okay, a non-cash contribution to a project that obviously, away from the actual ISP. So in the case where you have a smaller ISP, right, that wants to take on a larger project, and they're probably the right ISP because they're local to that community. They know the community. The only problem they have is that they tend to be smaller in terms of balance sheet assets relative to the size of investment it takes to complete the project. Having some form of external guarantee, whether it's a state, whether it's a county, whether it's, the federal government, whether it's a foundation that can offer that investment, that guarantee, or investor that guarantee, that can help solve that problem for that smaller ISP with regard to risk relative to the size of investment that they want to pursue.
And Carlos, any thoughts on the
Well, I would,
municipally funded or publicly funded?
well, again, it's also about ownership. So municipal ownership, when we're talking about municipal ownership, we're talking about a whole different set of investment calculations in terms of what the municipality is looking in terms of rate of return. Now, if they bring in other money, they have to satisfy the result set, but the municipality can use, their tax base to backstop any lending that they do. A municipality can find ways to encourage higher take rates. A municipality, in theory, should know better. A municipality can choose to make decisions that are more oriented toward making sure everybody has access, and be willing to, the fund if there is a gap. So it kind of keeps going back to also what the goal is of the project. But again, if a municipality if the area is horribly underserved, a municipality might make more sense than if it's not horribly underserved and you're talking about a gap. But it does depend on the project, and it depends on, I think, what people want to do. But there is quite a difference in terms of the ownership. The one thing that is coming up a bit, which is going to be an interesting debate going forward, is municipal ownership of the asset, but work in a public-private partnership with someone else running it, or a dark fiber project where multiple folks are supposed to come in. Those are, again, given the size of the state, we'll see how all that works out. But again, these are projects that we want to see which models do prove out as we go forward. But it does all come down to sort of, how do you mitigate the risk? And I think understanding your true take rate and working everything you can to ensure that take rate is achievable, those are big pieces of the puzzle that I cannot sort of, I can't sort of undersell, I think. And they will be things that lenders, if there are lenders involved or other, they will be looking at that.
Carlos, are you?
No. In all of this gets into the question of scale and mitigating risk. And so is it a solution that is done by town, region by region, county by county? This is a very complex issue to solve. It all has, it's the proverbial Pillsbury Doughboy. When you push it in one place, it pops out the other. And you have to make trade-offs as you go through that discussion. And I've seen, questions in here about, well, can we lease it? And those are all tools. Can you have a for-profit enterprise build it out, lease it to the municipality, take the depreciation expense, pay it back? And those are all ways to improve the cash flow to be able to do it. But what you have to do first is to understand the project you're trying to do. That's all solving to reduce the cost of financing, but you need to know what you're going to need to finance. What's the scope of the project? How many people you're going to try to reach? What is it? Everyone that you're going to do? Is it ubiquitous, or is it filling in gaps, as Carlos said? And what are we trying to achieve when we're done at the end of the day? Those are the hard questions. The rest of it is sort of solving for X, and it's putting the mosaic together. And there are a lot of tools. And having, whether it's 250 million, 428 million, or even more available in federal and state supports, that just means that the quality of the solution that we can build is that much better.
So I think
still isn't enough. Go ahead.
For I think what you're talking about here is starting to link the importance of planning with financing the project. And this
Absolutely.
in part goes back to the discussion that Peggy and Tim were having about building that campfire and getting everybody going on planning. Is there anything else people who are be thinking about some sort of public funding needs should be keeping in mind as we go forward with this? And then I'd like to come back to just make sure that we're clear about the risk mitigation tools that we've used in the state, and make sure we got them all. If there are any
I'd
more.
like to follow up on Carlos's point about scale.
Yeah.
This has been
Thought you
an
might.
ongoing, yeah, well, actually, he made it before I did. This is an ongoing conundrum where we are certainly committed to a community-based conversation. But the reality is it's an infrastructure project, and certainly we want communities who are building projects to be sustainable into the future. So, there is this, someday we'll have a conference that's not just about putting wire on poles, it's going to be about how do we leverage the asset we've built. And in that world, we want to have all these sustainable, whether or not they're small local ISP, local municipal owned broadband networks, or small ISPs or larger ISPs. So we want the whole ecosystem to be sustainable. So looking at your projects scale, as a risk mitigation strategy, as well as bringing down the project cost, is something you should look at as a community. You should be talking to adjacent communities. You should be thinking about, does a 300 home project really does make sense, or can we make it a 1,000 home project, or can we make it a 5,000 home project, and bring in larger revenue streams, finance larger pieces, increase the chances of our take rate. So these are things that as communities, you should all be thinking about, and how you can use that again as risk mitigation strategy, both on pulling down the project cost, as well as increasing the likelihood on the take rates, as well as making sure that your operating costs going forward are spread out across a larger base as well.
Maybe one thing I could add to that, Carlos, is that becomes extremely critical in a lot of, for a lot of reasons, but in particular, open access networks. Okay. And I'm sure most people are familiar with what an open access network is, but really, the simple definition or simple meaning behind it is, you have a network that is not owned by the ISP who is providing exclusive services to customers on that network, but instead is open to any number of ISPs who can access that network and compete for customers, okay, on that within the market. So when you come to things like scale, okay, if you have a community of 300 people, it's going to be hard to attract, qualified, quality ISPs to come and compete over 300 customers. So the more scale and the larger you can grow, so the more communities you can connect with and kind of join this open access network, the more likely it is that you can attract more better quality ISPs to compete for those customers. And, just to give a little perspective, in discussion recently, we had a team tell us that it was roughly about 10,000 premises. Now that's not take rate, that's total addressable market. That's the number of premises they want to see before they come and try to compete on an open access network. And I'm going to say it's not necessarily unreasonable, even though it is challenging, and there are exceptions, okay? But at the end of the day, for an ISP or a company to take on that cost of marketing their services, installing their services, it's not easy to attract customers to this network when it's really competitive in that sense. So the more opportunity, the more customers they can compete over, the more likely it is they're going to come to that, come try to compete on this network. So size of community and scale, that really is a critical piece. And one of the key examples is in an open access network.
And I muted myself. Anything else to add on risk mitigation tools before we move on to another question? Okay. So I think, Neil, you were starting to get at this. What are some of the other things that you can do to make your project stand out? It's not just to an impact investor. It's not just the number of premises passed. It's not just the total cost of the project. There's some other things.
Now, Nick, you are talking my language here. And I'm going to speak from the point of view of Arctaris, right? And I'm sure we're an impact investment firm. Other impact investment firms probably share a similar view on this. So the question is, how do you stand out, right? Like I said in my introduction, we are not going to invest without impact. So what does that mean? Obviously access, let's start there. That is that first baseline that needs to be overcome for an unserved community, right? There has to be some level of service offering there for people to join this network. So access, that's a challenge that is impactful in itself. However, if it's not affordable, it's hard for people to claim that's an impactful investment and really attract attention from impact investors. So if you don't have an ISP that can charge affordable prices on that network in some way, shape, or form, it's going to be hard to convince an impact investment firm to contribute capital to the project. So that really puts that spotlight on affordability. So, what are certain programs or things that you can do as an ISP to attract impact investment dollars? Think about multi-development units, for example. Find those larger developments or smaller developments that, have tenants that are on some level of HUD voucher. Come up with a solution where you will agree to offer services to those certain tenants that are on those vouchers at a discounted rate. Think about school systems or school districts, all right? Talk to the school system, talk to the local schools. They're typically willing to have discussions around which students are actually on some form of subsidized, lunch program, for instance. Figure out a way to offer some level of service at a discounted rate to those homes and families. All right, telehealth is another one that comes up. I don't want to go sit and wait 4 hours in a waiting room at a hospital or a clinic when I could be sitting on my couch getting called in through some type of telehealth, service on my computer. So think of ways to engage with national and state level health facilities that provide these services and try to enable those in your network. Bring those partnerships with you or try to identify who they are or work with partners that can bring them themselves. So that way you can address not just access, but you can also address affordability. And again, the whole market may not need these subsidies or incentives, but nearly in every under or unserved market, there is some subset of that population that would greatly benefit from those types of programs. All right, and maybe the final piece, it's, access, affordability, but how do we make these networks better? All right, what does that mean? We talk about this a lot at Arctaris internally to say, we wouldn't be living by our own words if we built out these networks or helped build out these networks just so people can sit around and binge on Netflix. All right, I love my Netflix, don't get me wrong, but that's not why we want to build this critical infrastructure. So think about things around smart city infrastructure, all right, internet security, VPNs, firewalls. Maybe it's partners who can deliver on educational content on these networks. Anything like that is really going to make you stand out to an impact investor and help you build some type of program that will not only deliver the network as a whole, but will help deliver that network as a whole because you have that focus on that smaller subset of the population that truly needs additional help.
Carlos, any additional thoughts on how to help your project stand out to impact investors?
Carlos, are you on mute?
No, I was just thinking, but I'll start. I hate to sound like a textbook. We've started this place over and over again. The plan is the important thing. When you go to the market, having an idea of what you need, what you can perform, and what you can do is so important. To get interest in it, you need to have a plan. Whether you're going to a bank or anyone else, you need that plan. So I will just say that and I'll kick it to the other Carlos.
Just again, some of the things that we have talked about in our experience. I mean, some things that you may not be as obvious are, answer for yourself some of the questions about, and then tell the investors, what are you going to do? Affordability is not only the subscription, it's also, are you going to hook people up later? What are you going to do post-construction? How are you going to address, what are you willing to do to subsidize and make sure that everybody can get hooked up that wants to be hooked up to achieve your take rate? So just think through the whole project and then maybe, sit back and take 5 minutes and think about how you want to leverage the connectivity that you're bringing to the community, post hanging the wires on the poles. Engage in that thinking, engage people in the community in that thinking. And it's not a huge part of your financing plan up front, but it is, I think, a really important distinction. And I think it will help with the community conversation. So I always want to leave every conversation on that note. Start thinking about what happens once after the wires are up on the poles.
Great. So moving into another question. This is a complicated arena, and this is, I think, really probably for Carlos and Carlos. How are you thinking about supporting community leaders, the people on this call, the people watching this, in digging into this and ensuring they're prepared to access these funds? And I think it probably, given the interest in the chat, both on the public ownership side and on, or at least the public ownership of a dark fiber network, and on the private ISP ownership side.
So one of the things that we have all agreed on at the Connectivity Authority is that we have a role to play in helping dispense the funding, but we also have a role to play in helping to think about best practices and best solutions, in educating folks and developing a process that is going to make it easier in a roadmap that people can utilize to help do this. It's easy for me to say, have a plan, when you've built a plan before. If you've not had to do it, it's hard to do it when someone just gives you a blank piece of paper. So part of what we're going to have to be doing, while we're trying to be efficient, while we're trying to dispense a tremendous amount of money, is to provide education to the communities as how to build a plan. And fortunately, we've got a lot of great people and professionals in the state who know this space well and can help them do that as well. So it's partnering with our friends at Arctaris, it's partnering with others that are probably on this call, it's partnering with the ISPs to help us give communities the tools to be able to start having these discussions.
Yeah, I would say that, I want to echo that this has been part of our conversation. And even in preparing for this panel, we're not trying to dispense information I certainly know how hard it is to build these plans, how communities need help building these plans. And then we need to come up with really clear processes for how to access the capital. We can also use our convening power to bring other folks to the table, including the commercial lending community in Maine, so that we can bring other people to the table and we can clearly articulate what it is the towns need to do to be able to access this capital. So we consider that part of the work that the MCA is taking on, and building on all the good work that ConnectMaine has been doing in terms of setting out the planning process in the last couple of years as well. So it's we convening power as well as devoting resources to assisting. That's some of the big things we're really looking at.
To follow up on that commercial lender comment, I think that's something that we regularly hear at the Island Institute, that there feels like there's a disconnect between commercial lenders and supporting some of these projects. How do we make it easier or more accessible for them to support some of these community-driven broadband projects?
Well, it's a challenge. I mean, I'm not going to speak for any specific commercial lender, but commercial lenders as a group lend on two things. They lend on demonstrated cash flow. We have a brand new network, no demonstrated cash flow. The other thing they lend on is collateral value. Well, the collateral value of fiber for fiber on a pole is worth nothing. The collateral value of a network is the value of the network calculated on its ongoing operating business. So again, it's on a dream. So the question then comes in is, what has traditionally been the value of a town or municipality or a region guaranteeing it, is to provide them some level of certainty to the value of the cash that they can lend against. And so in those communities that have been willing to step up and provide those guarantees, they have been easier to find commercial lenders who've been willing to provide. Unfortunately, all of the communities, we recognize the challenge you're facing, because it's usually those who need it the most that will figure out the way to get it done, because it's their community survival at stake. And so some of the great examples that we talk about on the members of the Island Institute have been so successful in doing it. It was community survival. The problem is how do we make digital survival and relying on things that Susan Corbett will talk about in digital equity to make it that important to everyone else when you're making trade-offs and saying, do I put up a new fire engine? Do I put up a new school building? Do I do a municipality? What am I going to put my state taxes, my municipal taxes behind it? That's where we're having the challenges getting through to that. And that's all of us. It's not one of us, it's all of us having that discussion in each one of our communities as to the power of this. And ultimately the communities that do it last will find that the value associated with their community, whether it's measured in tax revenue or real estate values or however they assess themselves. The last community that decides to invest, unfortunately, is probably going to be the least well off. And so how do we create that sense of urgency in communities to want to do that?
Can one of you connect what Carlos just said about municipal loan guarantees back to how it's valuable and connect it to take rates? Pushing a little, looking maybe at Carlos B there. Like what's been the value of having the community of Georgetown engaged in the project?
Well, I think that the value in Georgetown, has been that, I think we've known for a long time that the take rate was there to sustain the project. In the end, we raised private capital to do that, but they were well aware of what the take rate would be and have engaged with the town constantly to figure out other ways that we can make sure that we're going to connect everyone. Take rate is a measure of a community's involvement and commitment to the project. That's where it comes down to. So whatever investor, whether or not it's a community investor who wants to step up, or it's a bank that wants, it is all comes down to, what's the take rate going to be? What's the need for it in the community?
The game change, you asked us, what was the game change about this, the money that's coming in? Heretofore, or before today, it came down to the town, the municipality, the region taking on all that risk and saying, if I've got to get a take rate of 40% to make this project pencil out is the wonderful term that people will use sometimes. If it has to cash flow to be able to do it, I need 40% and I get 30%. The difference of 10%, I'm going to take it in my general tax revenues that we're going to collect from the town. That was the traditional formula that has been done, and it all fell on the community to bootstrap that.
Right. And
you've got to be willing to do it. Now, with this funding, you can take state money and federal money and put it alongside. So under that same example, a portion of it is going to come from the municipality and a portion of it will come from the state or federal money and will be determined. That's the game change, is that there's an opportunity to share in that risk that heretofore no one had the opportunity to do it before.
And there is a clock on it. To Carlos's point about, being the last one in, there is the treasury money is supposed to be put to work in 5 years. I'm still confused about the NTIA money, but there, as some people have noted in some of the chats, there are actually different, I don't know if I call rules, but different guidelines for different money that somehow the MCA is going to have to figure out how to reconcile all this. But the reality is the money is coming pretty quick and will be allocated in a short amount of time. So it does mean there's a clock on communities getting ready for when we start moving, and the pressure is on all of us to figure out a way to move relatively quickly, certainly much quicker than we ever have. So that's hence why it's so important that communities who have not already engaged in planning start to figure it out. And yes, again, going back to this conversation, the MC, we feel responsible for figuring out how to help. But again, it's still about the community and about sort of creating those relationships and understanding your community enough so you start to get organized.
I want to, before we close, highlight something Carlos M. said. With the municipal guarantee, if you're saying a 40% take rate makes the project pencil out, you get a 30% take rate, the municipality's covering that shortfall. If you have a 50% take rate, if you have an engaged citizenry, if you knock on all your doors and have a good, affordable service, if you do all of that hard work that you can do as a community, the project pencils out. Does the municipality still contribute that guarantee?
Well, the guarantee probably is in place, but now there's extra revenue coming into the municipality because their portion of the revenue is going to end up reducing their cash needs. So there is an opportunity as well as a challenge for the municipality, obviously.
Yep.
Okay, I think we are quickly heading towards closing here, unless I'll give the panelists one final chance to say something. Yeah, and I guess the last question, if anybody wants to comment on, is the builder finance. What do you think of builder financing over a period during which it's offset with earnings and depreciation expenses, leasing the network to the town and then selling it back to the town after a number of years? Well, the network has a longer life.
It is a model that's used in the impact investing community, and there are certain, we haven't gone into things like opportunity zones, but opportunity zones are even more beneficial for that depreciation expense and the like. It is a tool. It is a tool. And it really comes down to recognizing that it's a tool. Neil, I'm talking for you. I shouldn't do that.
No, I think Carlos, I think you nailed it there. At the end of the day, everyone's looking to, if you use fiber as an example, okay, this is a long-lived asset. All right, sometimes over 25 to as high as 40 years is some estimates we get now. It's almost unlikely to think that even, it's unlikely to think any business is still going to survive, a 25 to 40 year life cycle. Okay, so many, fail rates occur in years, 1 through 5, that, taking on the burden to buy this very expensive asset that's going to out-survive them probably as a company. It's almost, to some degree, it's an unfair ask. So when you look at the depreciation, some level of risk premium on this, and using some level of lease financing, you really do have to bring so many parties together that really understand this dynamic. The municipal guarantees really work well in this function because who will still be there in 25 to 40 years? You hope the municipality will still be there, even if the ISP is not. So I think you really need to be able to sync up each of those pieces. And this kind of gets to ownership as well. Who really owns the infrastructure? Who really owns the customer and customer revenue? How do you create a system where the risk and reward is properly aligned between each of those parties, while also giving the community some level of oversight, even if not ownership, over this network? Because they're the beneficiary. They're also going to be there in 25 to 40 years. So it really is, it's a tough balancing act. But as long as you look at the risk and rewards that each party is bearing and receiving in this type of development, you can really come to some type of framework that appropriately connects those dots and gives everybody their fair piece of the pie according to the risk that they're taking and the revenue in return they're likely to get.
I think we might end it there unless anybody else has a closing thought.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Neil.
Yep. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. thank you all for joining the panel. I know there was a lot of comments in the chat. NBC will be addressing them. There are a couple of panels that are interesting tomorrow for people involved in this discussion, including one on open access specifically. And so we will quickly head towards our wrap up. All right, cool.
Nick.
Thank you to the panelists. We'll just have a little bit of closing here. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We hope you are learning and enjoying the conversation. I know from where I sit, the conversation today has been a level deeper and a level more sophisticated than we were having in 2019 or 2018, 2017, and that's great. So we'll need to work together to close Maine's digital divide and to take advantage of this once in a lifetime opportunity. Two perspectives for everybody on the significant shifts that have taken place in this space. Everybody who on this call, everybody who's working hard for broadband in Maine, you've shifted the conversation from a discussion about whether broadband is important. Like January 2020, we were trying to convince people broadband was important. That conversation, January 2020, broadband's important. That conversation has changed. We know broadband is absolutely critical to the future of our state. It's a significant shift in the conversation, helped in part by the pandemic, helped in part by the successful bond campaign, and I think really helped by all the work that you're doing and this recognition that broadband is important to the future of every community in the state, the small rural communities. Everybody needs broadband. The other shift that we're in the midst of, and I don't think we're quite as far along in it, I think was evident in the chat in the last panel. What does competition look like in rural parts of the state? What's an appropriate way to subsidize capital costs? And how comfortable are we as a state with providing subsidies to private companies? And when we do provide those subsidies, what are we getting in return? I think that's the conversation that is changing under our feet, and it was not clear a couple of years ago that was the conversation we were going to be having this year. Huge thank you to Peggy and Tim for their leadership and insight over the years. We're on the cusp of something incredible here. As Tim said, we have an opportunity to use technology to address the needs of rural seniors, rural communities, small businesses on islands. Love those examples. It's a transformative moment for rural life in Maine. Some of us have a sense of what we can do individually with a good internet connection. But what can we do when everybody has a good connection? That is a different question. And I don't think as a community of people who are deep into broadband, we've thought enough about that. What can we do together to take advantage of the additional skills and resources and people who are now able to live and work in our communities because they can work remotely? We're seeing an influx of incredibly talented people from other places coming into our communities and living here for the quality of life. How do we tap into them? Also like to take a moment and thank Kendra, Joe, and Clara for their hard work in pulling this off. A virtual conference like this takes an immense amount of work, and they've been working tirelessly to make this happen. Please join us tomorrow for a full day of sessions, or half day morning of sessions. Nationally renowned keynote speaker, Susan Crawford. She's going to be giving a keynote address. We'll also be hearing from both Governor Mills and Senator King. And we'll have 4 expansive and diverse sessions. I'm glad they're being recorded. I can't pick which session I want to go to. I want to see them all. We'll be starting off with the same link. Kendra, Joe will put that in the chat. And once we get to the sessions, you can use the link for the sessions you select. All the links are in the agenda. The agenda is on the Broadband Coalition website. Go check it out. And a huge thank you to all of our sponsors, all of our speakers, and all of our attendees here today. It's been a pleasure to be with you and your questions and your comments and your perspectives. It's great. Thank you all, and I hope you have a good night. We'll see you again in the morning.